Hello and welcome to another episode of the Healthy Middle Ground podcast with me, Jen Curtis. And in this episode, what I'm going to talk to you about is how to lose weight fast. Now, you might say, well, that doesn't really sound like a healthy middle ground. And if you know me at all, you might say that doesn't sound like Jen. And you would be right, okay? Just because I'm doing this podcast episode does not mean that it's necessarily what I would advocate for. But I realize that sometimes there are reasons why people want to lose weight as fast as possible, and they might come into it highly motivated, wanting to get rid of as much weight as possible. And one possible scenario for that I have come across in the past, I think is entirely legitimate, is an ex-client that was very, very, very overweight and needed to make some really big changes and got diagnosed with some really horrible health conditions because of his weight. And it was really, really important. He came out of that doctor's appointment feeling incredibly motivated to make a massive change. And it was really important for his health and for his future to really get off as much weight as possible. And I do think that there are sometimes legitimate times when it does make sense to try to lose as much weight as possible, as quickly as possible. The thing is that all of the options out there are really fucking crazy. Like, we all grew up in the 1990s with like glossy magazine covers that are like, lose 10 pounds in 10 days. And it turns out you have to eat nothing but boiled eggs for 10 days and things like that. And so what I want to do in this podcast is actually a kind of healthy middle ground approach. What I want to do is, I feel like what happens is when people are really desperate and really want to lose weight fast, they resort to crash dieting and really, really, really crazy diets that are really low calorie, right? Like 800 calories a day. And if you know anything about how weight loss works, you'll know that that will work, but the person will be miserable. They will be starving hungry and thinking about food all the time. Their energy will be really, really low, and it will just overall really, really suck. So what I'm going to attempt to do in this podcast episode is suggest a more evidence-based kind of way of losing as much weight as fast as possible, and doing it in a way where, look, I'm not going to lie, it's going to be fucking hard, but where you're not going to be totally miserable, where you're not going to be starving hungry all the time, and where you're going to sort of like be able to still live your life to a certain degree. It is going to be hard. It does require a lot of discipline, and it does require like a lot of restriction, like not saying no to a lot of things, but it is possible to do it in a more, and it is obviously also going to be slower than if you just do a fucking stupid 10-day boiled egg diet, right? Like this is going to be a bit of a slower way, but it's going to be much healthier and a much kind of more balanced approach, if you can call it that, to losing as much weight as quickly as possible. So just to be totally clear, like my caveats, right? This is not necessarily what I would recommend. I would recommend a slower, more sustainable approach. But I also believe in giving people agency to choose what's right for them. So if a client came to me, and this has happened in the past, and said, I want to lose weight as fast as possible, I want to do everything I can, I would present to them the two options, and like a slower rate of weight loss, and then how to do it as fast as possible, and allow them to choose. And then I will help them make the best decisions along that path as possible. Because at the end of the day, it's up to you. It's up to the person. And like, I would want to help them do it as healthily as possible. So I think it's also important to understand what exactly you need to do to lose weight in the first place. And if you have no idea how weight loss works at all, you need to first of all listen to my episode on how to lose weight. That explains how you need to be in a calorie deficit. So if you don't understand what a calorie deficit is, if you don't know what your maintenance calories are, if all of that is like Chinese to you, you need to go and listen to that episode first. Losing weight faster means getting in a bigger calorie deficit. So I would normally recommend most people starting off to figure out their maintenance calories, then get into a 20% deficit. And that usually leads to about 0.5% to 1% of your body weight each week being lost, right? That's a sensible rate of weight loss. But here we might be trying to go for 1 to 2% of body weight each week. So if you weigh 200 pounds, you'd be looking to lose between 1 to 2 pounds each week, right? That would be the fast rate of weight loss. It's very hard to lose weight faster than that. And in order to do it, you would have to do an absolutely fucking mental crash diet. So again, this is still a little bit of a sensible approach, but it's a lot more hardcore than what I normally do and what I normally preach. And in terms of who is this for, I think it mostly applies to anyone who's very overweight or obese, who's got a high body fat percentage. And like I mentioned before, it might be particularly relevant if you have health conditions that are going to be reversed by losing body fat, so high blood pressure and things like that. But even if you don't have health conditions and you just want to, I don't know, lose as much weight as you can between now and summer to feel your best, and you want to just like, you're really motivated and you want to just kickstart everything. Maybe you had a baby a year ago and you've put on a ton of weight and you really just want to like get as lean as you possibly can, then this might be for you. If you are leaner, so like if you are already quite slim and you just want to lose the last 5 pounds or the last 10 pounds, whatever, even the last 10 kilos, right? Like this isn't really the approach for you, because the leaner you are, the more your body is going to fight you on this and the harder it is to lose weight fast. So it's just really not appropriate. I would recommend for doing it for a limited period of time, say 12 weeks. So you also, a prerequisite for doing this is that you need to have a 12 weeks where you can really dedicate a lot of time to this, rather than, you know, if your life is really, really busy and you've got a ton of things going on and you've got little kids and stuff like that, it is going to be really hard to implement everything that you need to do. Okay, so I'm going to break this. I'm going to go through the guidelines of exactly what to do to lose weight as fast as possible. And I'm going to break it up into diet and exercise. And then I'm going to talk about a little bit about what to do if you slip up and the trade-offs of this, and, you know, and also having an exit plan. And the exit plan is particularly important because it's what to do once you kind of have finished this dieting phase. If you just go back to your old habits, you're going to put back on any weight that you had lost. So you have to have a more reasonable diet that you're going to go to once you finish this diet phase. Okay, so let's talk about what to do in terms of the diet. So I'm just going to go through it quickly. So first of all, figuring out the right calories for you, and getting your calories as low as possible. And there's something that I call how low can you go? Having 4 meals a day at regular meal times, no snacking. 4, focus on filling foods. 5, protein and fiber at every meal. And what we're going to be talking about is doing something called a protein sparing fast. Minimal carbohydrates. 7, low fat. I know, this all sounds terrible. I told you it's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy. No calorie dense foods, even if they're healthy. No fun foods. 10, no alcohol or other empty calories. Whole foods. Okay, so I'm going to go through these in a little bit more detail, each one of them. Okay, so when it comes to setting your calories, right, this is the first stage of every single diet, figuring out what your maintenance calories are. Let's say your maintenance calories are 2,000 calories. That means you're expending 2,000 calories a day, and that is how many calories you need to maintain your current weight. So when we set a calorie deficit, as I said before, what I would normally do is go for a 20% deficit. So in this case, that would be 1,600. And we would aim for that first of all. And that should, in theory, lead to losing about 0.5% to 1% of your body weight each week. However, that 20% deficit for most people does leave a fair bit of wiggle room. I'm a big fan of flexible dieting. So if 80% of your calories come from whole nutritious foods, the other 20% can come from fun foods. This is not the case when you are trying to lose weight as fast as possible. It's not a flexible dieting approach. Basically, the idea is to get your calories as low as possible. That means that you have as big a calorie deficit as possible. So if your maintenance calories are 2,000 calories, you might be able to get into a 30 or even 40% deficit. Some people can even do a 50% deficit. It depends on the individual. It depends on what food they're eating. And it depends on how much fat they have to lose as well. If you are very, very overweight, you can usually get your calories very, very low, and your body won't fight you back with hunger. In the beginning, often hunger is very dysregulated, so that will get in the way as well. But that you can often get your calories down very, very low, and create a very big deficit without being too hungry. Now, there's a limit to how low your calories can go, okay? And that limit is going to be your hunger, right? So if you are eating only filling foods, which I'm going to talk about what that means in a minute, and you're eating protein and fiber every single meal, and maximizing your fullness, you are going to be able to get your calories really quite low without being hungry. So just to be totally clear, you will sometimes be hungry. You'll be eating 4 meals a day: breakfast, lunch, afternoon snack, and dinner. And you will get hungry before each of those meals, and you won't be stuffed after the meals. But if you follow these guidelines, you'll be sort of comfortably hungry, like a 6 or a 7 out of 10 before each meal, and you'll be satisfied after each meal. And there is a theoretical threshold that you can get to where you can get your calories down to without being starving hungry if you follow these other rules that I'm going to talk about later. So you may be able to get your calories down to 1,200 if you're doing all the other things like having filling food, and if you're not having any fun foods, okay? So it's realizing how low you can get your calories to be just above the threshold of hunger. And that is the lowest that you can get your calories, right? Because there are lots of diets out there that get you to do like 800 calories a day or 500 calories a day. And obviously you're going to lose more weight if you're eating 500 calories a day. But on 500 calories a day, you are going to be so fucking hungry and you're going to be thinking about food all the time. Whereas this approach to losing weight fast is not about being starving hungry, because then you're not going to be able to focus. You're not going to be able to do anything else. You need to keep your calories just above that threshold of where you're not going to be overly hungry, okay? Where you're going to be able to focus on other things. You're going to feel full after each meal, and you're going to be able to do other stuff and have energy and all of that kind of thing. So how low can you get your calories? That is going to depend wildly on the person, right? So again, if you're burning 2,000 calories a day, one individual might be able to get their calories down to 1,200. Somebody else might only be able to get it down to 1,400, and somebody else might be able to get it down to 1,000 calories, right? So there are differences between individuals. And obviously, if your maintenance calories are higher or lower, then the lowest you're going to be able to get your calories is going to change. So if your maintenance calories are 1,700, you might be able to get your calories down to 1,000 calories a day. If your maintenance calories are 2,500, you might only be able to get down to 1,500 calories a day. Okay, you have to think of the percentage of a calorie deficit that you're creating from your maintenance calories. But also the type of food you're eating, not just the number of calories, the type of food you're eating is going to be insanely important here. And that's what I'm going to talk about in a minute. Because if you just eat 1,200 calories of crisps and chocolate and very calorie dense foods, you're going to be fucking starving. Whereas if you get all of those calories from lean protein and lots of vegetables, you are going to be much fuller on the same number of calories. So we're going to go through all of that as well. How low can you go without being really, really struggling with hunger? That's something that each individual has to figure out. Then number 2 is eating 4 meals a day at regular meal time, even if you're doing a more sustainable approach. Breakfast, lunch, afternoon snack, and dinner. 8 a.m., 12, 4, and 8. That works for most people. Obviously, if something else works for you, fine. If you like skipping breakfast and then you've got more calories for lunch, afternoon snack, and dinner, that's fine. If you like skipping dinner and having more calories for the other meals, that is fine, right? But you need to figure out something that actually works for you, and you need to eat at regular meal times every single day. Eating around, I don't have to eat bang on 12, right? But around a 2-hour window. And not what you don't want to do is just go into each day with a blank slate and be like, are just going to eat when I'm hungry. And then it changes, you're eating at erratic times each day. That's important for fat loss in general, because then you can figure out, you get into a rhythm where you know exactly how much you need at each meal to get to the next meal. And it makes tracking and understanding your calorie intake so much easier. Okay. So you have to be eating regular meal times. Again, 80% of people are going to like the 4 meals a day approach. If you're part of the 20% that likes something a little bit different, that's up to you. It's possible to make it work if it genuinely suits you. But if you're somebody who likes to have a big meal for dinner and you decide to like not eat dinner because you think that's better for fat loss, you are going to really, really struggle. So you actually have to base this on what you prefer doing. So number 3 is linked to the previous point, no snacking, absolutely no snacking, right? So that is the worst habit for general health and fat loss and everything. So many people don't eat proper meals and they just kind of snack and graze throughout the day. Apart from the fact of what you're normally snacking and grazing on, you will ingest way more calories and not feel full if you're snacking all day as opposed to having structured meals. So even if you're doing it with healthy food like nuts and whole wheat crackers and fruit, you're going to be able to eat way more calories than if you eat structured meals. So it's really important to have structured meal times and not snack and graze like at all, right? Any snacking and grazing just ends up putting more calories in your body without you feeling full and satisfied. Number 4 is you have to focus on filling foods. I have an ebook that I'll put in the comments below or in the description below that goes through exactly how to eat, what filling foods are, and how to get more satiety from your foods. So there are a number of ways of doing this, but basically you have to focus on high volume foods, not calorie dense foods. Okay, so you need to be looking at how many calories does this have per 100 grams. So for example, berries have 35 calories per 100 grams, whereas a banana has 100 calories per 100 grams. The berries are going to be much, much more filling for a third of the calories, okay? And just like if you look at like, I don't know, lean meat, for example, like chicken breast, 160 calories per 100 grams, whereas salmon or a fattier meat is going to be like 200 calories per 100 grams. And often things like crackers that are sold as health food things, they have like 400 or 500 calories per 100 grams. Dried fruit often has 400 calories per 100 grams. Okay, so they don't make you full. So one of the worst things to eat if you're really trying to get your calories low is something like dried fruit and nuts, right? Super calorie dense, and they're not going to make you feel full. So we want to focus on high volume foods, things like vegetables, things like berries, things like low fat yogurt, things like cottage cheese, things like lean meats, right? All of the fruits in general have much, much more volume rather than more calorie dense foods. And this is going to allow you to get your calories lower while having the same sort of hunger levels. Okay, so by increasing satiety, you can lower your calories, but you're not more hungry. And often you can lower your hunger levels because you're eating very satiating foods. Number 5 is having protein and fiber at every single meal, right? So that being the priority. And in many cases, you're going to be able to get away with just protein and fiber. Okay, so breakfast might be a 0% fat protein yogurt and 100 grams of berries, right? Lunch might be 3 scrambled eggs and some cut up vegetables. Afternoon snack might be the same as breakfast, just to make things easier. And then dinner might be a tuna salad. So in many cases, you can get away with just protein and fiber. They should certainly be the priority at every single meal. Some people will manage to be able to eat just that and get their calories very low. But that absolutely has to be the priority every single meal, and like bulking it up as much as possible with fruits and vegetables and things that provide a lot of volume. So this is basically stripping your diet down to the absolute essentials that you need. And if you were to do this in the most extreme way, you would just have protein and fiber at every meal, and that would be it. Okay, number 6 is minimal carbohydrates. Now I say minimal and not zero carbohydrates because the difference between some carbohydrates and no carbohydrates is what's going to make this feasible for some people. So while the ideal or the most extreme variation of this would be just protein and fiber, because you don't technically need carbohydrates, many of you will find that you do need some carbohydrates in order to not be too hungry. So it might not be at every single meal, but adding like a slice of bread to your lunch of scrambled eggs and vegetables, you might need that to be that extra little bit full, especially if your maintenance calories are quite high and you're quite active. At dinner, you might have some rice or some couscous or something like that, like a starchy carbohydrate, in order to like make you feel more full. Now, I want to emphasize why I'm saying this, because I'm not saying carbs are bad and we shouldn't eat carbs and low carb diets are better than higher carb diets. I'm purely saying it from the perspective that they are often calories that you can remove from your diet and you'll still be full and it won't affect your health, right? You can't not have fiber. You can't not have protein. You need these things, but you can reduce carbohydrates. Some people will be able to take it out of every meal. Some people might still need it in one meal a day. Some people might need it in 2 meals a day, but being also very mindful of quantities. At lunch, you might only need 100 grams of rice to get through. At dinner, you might need 200 grams of rice or 100 grams of bread, right? So being aware of how much you need to fill the gaps in hunger and then doing that, because after protein and fiber, the next most filling thing is carbohydrates. And when it comes to doing this diet successfully, you're going to need to manage hunger. So if you're absolutely starving, you're not going to be able to last for very long and you're going to be absolutely miserable. So adding some carbohydrates in might be the difference between finishing lunch and being like, oh, I'm still really starving and empty and like thinking about food all the time. If you just have a slice of bread or 100 grams of rice, you might feel much more full and satisfied and better. And so even though you're kind of sacrificing a bit of a calorie deficit, that is what is going to make this tolerable for you for like 3 months. It's going to cause you to mess up. Okay, so number 7 is low fat. Like low fat is so unfashionable. And I know the narrative now is like, obviously it's not just a narrative, right? You do need fats to be healthy, right? And you do need about 20% of your diet to come from fats, healthy fats, in order to be healthy. And you shouldn't really drop below that 20%. But in practice, that's quite easy to do because there are tag-along fats, especially in things like eggs, salmon, chicken, things that you're going to be eating as well. But going low fat really does help shave off calories that will help you lose weight faster without being hungry. So if you switch to a 0% yogurt and to like 3% cottage cheese, like a lower fat milk, if you have chicken instead of beef, if you have like ground chicken instead of ground beef, like minced chicken instead of minced meat if you're English, right? These things are going to help you cut off 50 calories here, 100 calories there. You might not think it's very much, but over the course of a whole day, you can often shave off 200 to 300 calories just by having a lower fat option, and you're going to be just as full. Now, there is a bit of a narrative that's like, you must include fats in every single meal in order to feel full. That is not actually true. If you add fats to your meal, like the narrative is that it slows gastric emptying and blah, 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 blah. But if you're eating protein and fiber, that's going to slow gastric emptying just enough. And the fats just add calories. And if you think about a tablespoon of oil, it's like 120 calories. It's incredibly calorie dense. It's a very small amount of volume and it adds a fuck ton of calories, right? So they're the sorts of things that you need to cut out, like tuna and brine rather than oil, not adding oil to your salads, using a bit of spray oil when you're doing eggs or something in a pan, like trying to use minimal oils and minimal fats. Again, this is a short-term thing to get a ton of weight off. It's not going to be problematic for your health long-term, even if you go very low fat. And in any case, it's very hard to go below 20% of your intake being fat, which is, so you're going to be fine in terms of health anyway, but it's going to make drastic differences to how many calories you're consuming. And so you're going to be able to lose weight much, much faster. And some nutritionists and stuff like that will be like, oh my God, this is terrible advice. You need fats, blah, 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 blah. Yes, you do need fats, but cutting them down for a short period of time to get a ton of weight off is, I would argue, is much better for your weight, for your health, if you are very overweight, than having the fats for that period of time. Obviously, you're going to have fats across the lifespan. You're still having some fats. I'm not talking about 0% fat or zero fat intake for the diet. I'm just talking about bringing it down as much as you can, because they are very, very calorie dense and will just add a lot of calories without fullness. Number 8 is no calorie dense foods, even if they're healthy. So things like peanut butter are the first thing that come to mind, really high in calories. But they're also high in good fats. They've also got a bit of protein in it. It can be a very healthy food, but they are going to add a ton of calories without any fullness. So you don't want to be eating foods like nut butters, like dates, like dried fruits, okay? All of these things, very, very high in calories. Even though they're healthy, they're very, very high in calories. Like 70% dark chocolate, right? You don't want to have it because it's just going to put calories in, and as much as possible, like I said, cutting down the oils, the fats, and things like that. There are some gray area things like avocado that are quite high in calories, but they're also quite filling and they've got more volume than things like oils. So include them sparingly. Granola is a big one. Even if it's a super healthy one made with all natural organic ingredients, it's still too calorie dense. Don't have it while you're doing this fat loss phase. Number 9 is no fun foods. Okay. So I am very much somebody who talks about a flexible dieting approach, 80-20 approach to nutrition. If 80% of your calories are coming from whole, nutritious foods, the other 20% are what we call discretional calories, where you can have some chocolate and some ice cream and some wine and some crisps and some things that are not so good for you, because that is the real world. And that is like, it's really, really hard to cut them out completely, even if they're not actually good for us, but they tend to be very, very calorie dense. So if you are aiming to lose weight as fast as possible, cut out the fun foods, cut out the chocolate, cut out the brownies, cut out the cake, cut out ice cream, all of that stuff. Again, it's not forever, but it is for this period of time. Again, as I'm saying this, I'm thinking of all the caveats and like that this is promoting, too extreme of a approach, and it can cause like a backlash, and then people might swing back too far the other way and create like a restriction overeating cycle. And these things are all true, okay? But again, I think it's going into it with the right mindset of, I'm doing this for a set period of time. I should have done that in the introduction, actually, just like the mindset part of it. Doing it for a set period of time, like 12 weeks, I'm going to get off as much weight as possible. And then I'm going to move to something that's much more sustainable and flexible and a bit more permissive. Okay. So like that is really, really, that mindset piece of this is really, really important, because this obviously is an extreme approach. But again, the title was How to Lose Weight as Fast as Possible. And this is the evidence-based way of doing that. Even if it does seem quite extreme, it's way less extreme than having just fasting for 3 months or having 500 calories a day for 3 months, okay? So I'm trying to present a more middle ground approach, a more sensible approach to losing weight as fast as possible, even though I don't think that's often the right approach. It's certainly, in most scenarios, it's not the right approach, and it is quite extreme. You would cut out all fun foods, right? Because they're very calorie dense. And again, just for this period, and same with alcohol and other empty calories. Just none of that. Like, it's just going to add calories that aren't giving you any nutrition, and they aren't giving you any fullness. Okay. And that is a really important part of this diet. You need to be making sure, in order to fight hunger, you need to be making sure that all of the foods that you're eating are giving you a big bang for your buck in terms of fullness, and also a big bang for your buck in terms of nutrients. And that's why we focus on protein and fiber vegetables and fruits and a little bit of fat. And that's the way you're going to get, even though your calories are really, really low, that's how you're going to get adequate nutrition. And then 11 is whole foods. So really focusing, the bulk of your diet should come from single ingredient food. So like chicken, beef, eggs, a bit of butter, a bit of olive oil, vegetables, fruits, okay? Even things like rice or stuff like that, right? Or other grains or legumes or whatever. We want to be, the bulk of the diet should come from, in fact, in this particular diet, all of your foods should come from whole foods, right? And not from ultra processed foods. There's some exceptions, like I would include bread in your diet, like here and there, but like, even though that's technically a processed food and not a single ingredient food, but it's still very filling and it has some nutrients in it, especially if it's whole grain. But that really should be the bulk of your diet, is those real whole foods and really nothing that's very calorie dense or very processed. One other thing I forgot to say, just in terms of carbohydrates, it's also worth noticing which carbohydrates are more filling than others and which ones have fewer calories per 100 grams. So, like the best ones are things like potatoes, are like 77 calories per 100 grams, especially if you boil them. They're very, very filling. Couscous is about 120 calories per 100 grams. Same with rice. Pasta is a bit higher, like 130 calories per 100 grams. Bread is like 260 calories per 100 grams. So paying attention to these different types of carbohydrates and which ones are more filling, and which ones are going to give you like the same fullness for fewer calories. And that's the things like the potatoes and also things like couscous. And finally, before we move on to the exercise portion of this, supplements. It might be worth taking a few supplements just because you are on very low calories. Just take a multivitamin, an omega-3, make sure you've got iodized salt and folic acid if you're in the childbearing years of your life. You probably don't need anything beyond that. That'll cover your bases. But if you are deficient in anything, then you'll want to take that too. Okay, so let's move on from the diet side of things to exercise. This is a much shorter list. There's really only 3 things on this list. So first of all, strength training. I would encourage you to strength train anything from between 2 to 5 days a week. Now, this really, really, really depends on your current level, right? If you are not in shape and never done strength training before and not very strong, I'd say twice a week is sufficient. Maybe 3 times a week if you've got a really well-structured plan. Like if you're working with me and I'm helping you, like I'm giving you the right amount for you, you can definitely spread that over 3 days, but you probably want to go to 2 days a week. And depending on your level of experience, you could go up to 5 days a week, but obviously then you would have splits. So it would be like lower body, upper body, or like arms and things like that. Like you wouldn't be able to just do like 5 times a week full body. Okay. And focusing on strength training, on progressive overload. I'm going to do another podcast on this. I've got other resources on this. I have an email course on how to do strength training properly. Now, the reason we want to do this is because we want to preserve as much muscle mass as possible, because that is going to make a huge difference to your body composition. So if you lose 10 kilograms and you don't do any strength training, 1/3 of that weight is going to be lean tissue. Now, that doesn't mean it's all muscle. It's other lean tissue like water and things like that. But what will happen is you'll lose 1/3 of your weight will not be fat. So 1/3 of your weight loss, it will be other tissues. So if you lose 10, 20, 30 kilos, but out of 30 kilos, 10 kilos is lean tissue, that's a really bad thing. You're going to have less muscle mass and you're going to have more. Whereas if you do strength training at least twice a week, you can not only prevent that muscle loss. If you lose 30 kilos and all of it's fat, versus if you lose 30 kilos and only 20 kilos of it is fat, which is what will happen if you don't do strength training, you are going to look very, very different, and you're going to feel different as well in terms of energy, in terms of strength, in terms of all of those things. So we absolutely must be doing strength training in order to maintain muscle loss. This is true if you're taking Ozempic, right? This is always true. We need to do strength training to prevent muscle loss and hopefully build some muscle. Because then also if you lose 30 kilos and we actually manage to build 5 kilos of muscle mass, guess what? That means you've lost another 5 kilos of fat mass, and your body composition is going to be radically different than if you just lost 20 kilos of fat and then another 10 kilos of lean tissue, including a lot of muscle. So that strength training piece is the most important part of it. And the amount that you can do is going to be limited to how quickly you can recover. So if you're brand new, you might only be able to do 2 sessions a week because you're only going to be able to recover from 2 sessions a week. You're not going to be able to get more in. Whereas if you're more trained, you might be able to do more. And if you do start with 2 strength training sessions a week, if you are working with me, once you get into a rhythm and you understand what you're doing and you're recovering better, then we add a 3rd training session a week. Okay, so number 2 is steps. Aiming for as many steps a day, right? This is, especially if you are overweight, this is going to increase your calorie expenditure massively. Now, there isn't one particular number that everyone should aim for. Obviously, people throw around 10K steps or whatever, but basically you need to figure out a baseline. If you're only doing 3,000 steps a day, you should just aim to do 5,000 steps a day in the beginning, just increasing that by a couple of thousand steps a day and then increasing over time. So maybe each week adding another 1,000 steps a day and then getting to something like, I would aim for a minimum of 7,500 steps a day. But if you can, going higher than that, 10,000, 12,000, 15,000, as long as you can recover from it. Again, if you're incredibly unfit, incredibly sedentary, you're going to need to start by increasing gradually. But the more steps a day you do, the more you're going to increase your calorie expenditure. And this is really important, especially if you are very, very overweight, because if you weigh 100 kilos, and you do 10,000 steps a day, you're going to burn way more calories than somebody who weighs 60 kilos and does 10,000 steps a day, right? Every 1,000 steps a day are going to make you burn much more calories because you're carrying a lot more weight on you. But again, you're going to have to break this down to like, you can't just go from 3,000 steps a day to 10,000 steps a day because you're going to be really sore and you're not going to recover from it and you're going to be exhausted from it. So you have to increase gradually, but with the goal to get the steps as high as possible. And I've worked with a lot of people where we've just said track and move and just kind of gamifying it, trying to get as many steps a day, trying to get an extra 10 minutes, trying to get a few more minutes somewhere else, answering messages while standing up, walking around the room, just trying to get more movement in wherever you can. And these like movement snacks, this is also going to improve your baseline fitness so radically and way more than doing cardiovascular exercise. And then the third thing is when it comes to cardiovascular exercise, it's the last thing on the list, right? And it's not necessary, but what I would recommend doing is either low intensity cardio or walks on your rest days. So doing your 2-3 strength training sessions a week, and then on those days in between, trying to get those 10,000 or get as many steps as you can in between, and going out for dedicated walks on the days that you're not strength training. Or you could go for a swim that's very gentle. You could go on an exercise bike. It really doesn't matter. The heart's a dumb muscle. It doesn't care what you're doing, but I would keep it low intensity purely for the fact that you need to be able to recover from it. If you go really, really, really hard and go out on a half-hour jog, you're going to be really sore the next day and it's going to interfere with your strength training, and it often interferes with your energy levels as well. Whereas doing low-intensity cardio, it's not that it burns more fat, it's not anything like that. It's just a pragmatic thing. It doesn't wear you out, it doesn't make you sore, and you can do more of it, okay? So that is how I would approach exercise, is basically those 3 things. Strength training 2 to 5 times a week, steps 10K a day if you can, but building up from wherever you're at, and then low intensity cardio or walks on the rest days. Now, a really important thing I want to talk about before we end this podcast is what to do if you slip up, because obviously this is a quite extreme diet. This is quite hard to do. It should be manageable, but it is quite hard to do. The most important thing is to understand, first of all, you're a human, right? chances are you are going to slip up at some point doing this diet, or you're going to be invited to something and it's going to be impossible to do the diet. Don't fall into all or nothing thinking, okay? Accept that you probably are going to slip up a few times, even if you're really, really, really motivated, okay? You're aiming to do this for 3 months, 12 weeks. I totally get it, but you probably are going to slip up a few times. It's really important not to fall into all or nothing thinking, okay? Because people will be like 2 weeks in, they'll have lost loads of weight, and then they'll eat some brownies at a birthday party, and then they'll go, oh, I slipped up, I've ruined my diet, and then they just give up. If you give up, you will just put all the weight back on. Whereas if you just go, okay, never mind, I slipped up, let's draw a line under it. From the next meal, I'm just going to get back on track. Not from the next day, not on Monday. Like today, I'm going to get back on track on my next meal. Okay, I had brownies, blah, 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 whatever. Like, but now I need to move on. Okay, just getting back on track. That is the most important thing. And you might find that throughout these 3 months, you do have a bit too much and overindulge a few times here and there. But you can still make amazing progress if you get back on track. So this is how we stop from being like all or nothing and just going, fuck it, I've ruined the whole thing. Because it can be such a shame. Sometimes people have lost like 10 pounds, then they slip up one time and they think, fuck it, I've ruined everything. You haven't ruined everything, okay? It's kind of like the analogy that I like to use is if you're studying for a 4-year degree, right? And every day you study for like 8 hours a day, you study. And then one day you're sick and you have all these things going on and you don't study for that day. Like you're 6 months into your degree. Do you just say, fuck it, I've ruined my whole degree now, I'm not going to get a degree, and give up and just go home? Or do you just get back on studying the next day? You get back studying the next day because all the knowledge that you've gained, all the things that you learned in those first 6 months, they're still with you. You haven't lost them. You just keep going from where you left off on the next day that you get back to studying. So this is exactly the same. Like if you've lost 10 pounds and then you slip up and eat like an asshole, you won't have gained all those 10 pounds back in one meal, right? You just need to get back on track the next meal and you'll continue losing weight and you'll get 15 pounds and then you'll slip up again and then you get back on track and you keep going, you lose another 7 pounds and then you'll slip up again. Like this is how you are going to slip up. It's okay to slip up. Just get back on track the next day. And if you really, really understand that just about getting back on track, doesn't matter how many times you slip up, you will reach your goals. Consider also, so another little tip is to consider having planned diet breaks and refeed days. So like you might have 1 day a week that's higher calories just to make it easier, or you might every so often, you've got an event coming up, so like you just decide to not track calories, go and enjoy yourself for that evening meal or that lunch or whatever, or for your birthday or whatever it is, and then just get back on track the next day. Obviously, if you're working with me, I help you plan those refeed days or those going off like the diet days, and I help you get back on track. But this is something that you can implement yourself as well. And another really, really, really important tip is know that you can always revert to a slower, more sustainable diet. So if you're in a deep calorie deficit, you're eating 1,200 calories a day and it's just too hard and you just can't sustain it, bring your calories up, be in a 20% deficit, have a little bit of wiggle room, revert to a flexible dieting model where you're not cutting out all of the fun stuff and the calorie dense stuff, and just accept that it's going to be a little bit lower. So it doesn't, again, not being all or nothing. Either I'm doing this really hard crash diet or I'm just going to go back to my old shitty eating habits. If you're feeling like it's not sustainable and you can't do it, don't just revert back to your old shitty eating habits. Just increase your calories, do something that's a little bit more sustainable, that allows you to enjoy your food a little bit more, that allows you a little bit more wiggle room, and like you'll still get to where you want to go. It will just take longer. And final tip here is to have an exit strategy. So with all of my clients, I emphasize that I really want them to stay. Once they've reached their goal, I want them to spend at least a couple of weeks at maintenance working with me so that they know how to bring their calories up and not just go back to what they were doing before. So whether this is you do the 12 weeks, if you are very overweight, right, you might decide to do 8 to 12 weeks of this, really like losing weight as fast as possible. And then afterwards, revert back to a slower pace of dieting, because you probably won't reach your entire goal in those 8 to 12 weeks. So then your exit strategy will be a more sustainable approach. Again, if you're working with me, I will calculate those calories for you. I'll calculate the 20% deficit. I'll tell you how much to eat to still be in a calorie deficit. If you're doing it by yourself, you need to calculate that yourself, going back to your maintenance calories and figuring out what a 20% deficit would look like, and then eating in a sensible way. One thing that maybe I didn't say that I should have said when it comes to calories and things like that, you need to be tracking your calories. You need to be weighing and measuring your food. You need to know exactly what's going in. You need to be very precise with it. You also need to understand the trade-offs of doing a diet like this. So one of my favorite expressions is there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs, okay? If you attempt to do this is hard, okay? This is hard. It's not going to be easy to not eat your favorite foods like for 8 to 12 weeks, but also being very overweight and not being happy with where you're at and having health problems, that's also hard, right? So this might be a hard thing that you decide to do for a period of time. But if you do decide to do it, you also need to be kind to yourself, give yourself a pat on the back, and not be a monster to yourself and beat yourself up all the time, because that's also not going to work. Again, if you're working with me, I'll be coaching you through that and giving you a boost and making sure that you're not being too hard on yourself and that you are giving yourself a pat on the back. Because this is a hard thing, okay? This is a hard thing to do. For some of you, this is my whole point, is that even though this is quite an extreme approach, for some of you, this might be the right approach for a period of time. And for others, you might listen to this and go, okay, now I understand what's involved in losing weight fast. I realize that it's not for me, and I'm much better off doing something much more moderate and approaching things slower and in a more sustainable way. And also, just don't be all or nothing, right? You can always take diet breaks or refeed days or revert to a slower pace of fat loss. So I think that's my overall message, is that this is a very, very hard diet to do. This is a hard approach, but it's a fuck of a lot easier than all of those crazy crash diets that people do that are like 500 calories a day, 800 calories a day, that are all like shake and soup replacements and things like that, right? This is less strict than that, and you're not going to be as hungry as that, right? The major goal of this diet is to always be above your hunger threshold, so that you are able to actually focus on other things. It also means it will be a little bit slower than some of those really crazy crash diets, but it will be faster than a more sustainable approach to fat loss. Finally, I want to say that if you need help with this, message me about online coaching. I can help you with whatever it is, right, that you want to do, whether you want to do a fast approach to fat loss and lose weight as fast as you possibly can, and you want to do it as sensibly as you possibly can and not go batshit crazy. I can help you with that. If you want to do a more sustainable approach, I can definitely help you with that. And that's my preferred approach. If you're not sure what's right, I can help you figure that out. I can help you transition from a hardcore approach to a more sustainable approach. So that's it. That is my guide to losing weight as fast as possible. And if you listen to this and you think, yep, this is what I want to do, it's really important for me to get weight off as fast as possible, I'm going to commit to this, it's something that I feel like I can do, then that's great. And if you come away from this feeling like, okay, now I understand, what needs to happen and what things I need to think about in order to make that happen, then fantastic, that's great. But likewise, if you listen to this and you go, fuck me, this sounds really hard, there's no way I could do this, and it helps you just be more realistic in accepting that you need to go for a more slow, sustainable approach, then that's okay too, okay? Like, the important thing is, from my perspective as a coach, is that you always have agency to make the decisions what to do with your body, and it's always important that comes from you. But it's also important to make informed decisions, to know what's involved in certain approaches, so in losing fat faster or in a more sustainable approach. my approach is that you need to understand what parameters you're working within. So you need to understand things like your maintenance calories and how much of a deficit you should be aiming for, and what the trade-offs are, right? And as long as you have that clear, then you're gonna have the information you need to make informed decisions about what's best for you at this specific junction in your life. So this whole episode isn't necessarily to try to convince you to do this. It's more of just like, well, if this is something that you want to do, this is what you're going to have to do. If you're okay with those trade-offs, then go ahead. But you need to be fully aware of what it involves and also what it shouldn't involve. So it shouldn't involve being starving, hungry, eating 800 calories a day, things like that, because that is not going to be sustainable. So if you found this helpful, shoot me a little comment below. It helps with engagement. Let me know if you have any questions. You can shoot a message over to me privately, and please make sure you subscribe on whatever platform you're on, whether it's YouTube or Spotify or whatever it is. It really, really helps me reach more people and grow this channel.